This is going to be an example of the running stitch sample that you will complete. You are going to start with one of the knots that we discussed in class or was shown on another video clip. I'm going to do the dressmaker's knot. So I'm pinching my thread between my thumb and my forefinger. I'm wrapping the thread around the top of the finger above that. I'm holding onto the thread as I roll my thumb against my finger to create the loop. Then I pull the top of the loop down to create a big knot. I'm going to use this as a waist knot. When you are making your running stitches, the goal is to keep the stitches about 1/8 of an inch and 1/8 of an inch apart. We also want to keep an even distance from our edge, as if we're making a true seam. For this sample, let's do about 1 inch, because that's kind of an easy place to eyeball. You can give yourself marks if you need to try to keep your seam allowance even, but I'd like you to keep your stitches going without marks. So since I'm using this as a waist knot, I will come from 1/2 inch to where I want to start my stitches. Maybe. There we go. So I'm going to leave my waist knot out here. Now I'm going to take a little foundation stitch, and this is a teeny tiny little stitch. Very similar to the back stitches. Now the running stitches, you can probably put 3, maybe 4 on each needle. So you're going to come in and out of both layers of fabric. And this is a good place to see if your needle is going crooked or if it's going straight with the edge of your fabric. Maybe you want to straighten them up. Then pull through, and again just to taut, not to really tight. If you pull your stitches tight, then your fabric will pucker. So we want to try to keep your stitches even, the distance from the edge of the fabric even, and everything going straight. And again, pull to tight, to taut, not to tight. When you are going to stitch all the way across your piece, and then you're going to practice one of the knots that we had in class and in the earlier video. On each of one of these, I want you to try a different type of knot. Also note that I'm not going all the way through the fabric and coming back up. I'm practicing this kind of stitch. These samples are given to you to practice your dexterity and to practice some stitches that we will have to implement later on in the class. So the idea is to go in and out and not to go up and down. For time's sake, we're going to pretend like I've stitched all the way across that sample. So now I need to do a knot. One knot that we discussed was taking a small stitch and then doing the figure 8 around the end of the needle, pulling the thread through that figure 8, and then taking one more small stitch. After you've completed your knot at this end, you can clip that, remember, with your 1/4 of an inch tail, and clip your waist knot completely off. And this is your completed running stitch. The next one that we're going to do is called a blind hem. Now, all blind stitches are done in between the layers. So, where we're going to you're going to prepare your sample with 1 inch hem. So this would be as if this is the front of our garment, the front edge of a skirt. So we need to attach the hem depth to the garment. It's also blind because we don't want to see too many stitches on the right side of our garment. There are, of course, with using the sample fabric, or the sample thread, excuse me, you will see the stitches a little bit more than you would if I was using green thread to blend in with the fabric. For this sample, I'm going to use the back stitches. So on the hem side, and again, you can use any of the knotting techniques that we discussed. I just want you to use a variety so that you can see which one works best for you. So just take a few small stitches on the hem side to secure your thread. Oops. So you can see that I have folded back the main part of my skirt, and I have the hem sticking up and a fold. What we want are the stitches to come in between the fold and the fabric. We also want to keep an even distance on the edge of the hem and an even line on the skirt side. What you're going to do is come a little bit forward, maybe not quite a quarter of an inch, and on the hem side you'll just catch 1 or 2 threads. Teeny, teeny, tiny, because this is how it becomes blind on the front side. And then you'll move that same distance forward, maybe 3/8 of an inch, and take an 1/8 of an inch stitch on the hem side. So on this hem side, you can take a bigger stitch. Oops. And make sure, yeah, just like that, your thread is with you every time you take a stitch. Now I'm going to move again the same amount forward and take just 1 or 2 threads. They have to be close together because the stitch, the big, since we're just taking such a tiny stitch on the hem side, the stitches need to be closer together so we don't pull the skirt or try to make just 1 or 2 threads hold up the entire hem. So little teeny, easy for me to say, stitch on the hem side, and then come back across to the hem side and take a bigger 1/4 of an inch stitch. So we're always moving forward. It's kind of a zigzag back and forth between the hem. Oops, that one's too big. We'd see that. The hem side and the dress front or the skirt front side. And you're moving forward about the same amount each time. And again, just pulling to taut, not to tight. Some of these are getting kind of big. Now, after you've done a few, check on the front side of your garment and see how, if you're just taking 1 or 2, if your stitches are evenly spaced in between each other, and if they're an even distance from the bottom of your garment. Because it would be much easier to just take out 1 or 2 that don't look good rather than the whole thing once you get all the way across. Because we can always readjust things. So it's not a done deal. Okay, so this is how the stitches look on the inside of the garment. When the garment is finished, it will hang flat. So this is the bottom edge of my garment, here's my hem, and then this would be like the top of your garment going towards the top of the skirt. What we want to see are that our stitches are evenly spaced out and they're barely visible. Again, if we were stitching with the same color thread as the fabric like we normally would, then you would hardly see those stitches at all. When you're presenting this, you will press it flat like you would a finished garment. Now we must finish, we're going to again pretend like I've stitched through the end of this sample, and we need to make a knot. So this time I'll use the tailor's knot. You make a big circle, put the needle through the circle, and hold it down so that it secures your stitches. And then you can clip so you have another 1/4 of an inch tail on the end. Again, once you're finished, you would press this flat and present it for turning in like as such. This next one is called the slip stitch. Now we tried the slip stitch when we were doing our pin cushions, so that's where this might be familiar from. However, it takes a little bit of practice, so that's what we get to do here. Once again, I'm going to start with the dressmaker's knot. So big circle, roll it off, pull it down, and there's my big knot. The slip stitch is between two folded edges. So you are going to create your sample and you're going to press back an inch on either side. So this is our seam. Kind of like the running stitch, we are creating another seam. What I have done is then to pin right along my seam line. So bringing the two folds together, pinning those together. And that way, when it is flat in front of me, they're kind of held together until I get there. So this is the seam that we're stitching. Again, we don't want to see our stitches. A slip stitch should be invisible to the top side of the fabric. So what we're going to try to do is to bring these two folds together. I'm going to hide my knot in this fold. And what I'm going to do then is come directly across from that fold into this fold and just slide down for a nice maybe 3/8 of an inch stitch. Again, if this is what's holding your seam together, we want it to be pretty small stitches. And then directly where I come out of that fold, I go across to the other fold. So you're going back and forth, but you want your stitches to be right across from each other. Let me put a few more in and then or let me unthread my needle. Let me put a few more stitches in and then I can show you a few things. So directly across and come up the fold. And again, we're trying to keep our stitches even and consistent. Directly across. And come right out the fold. So we're pulling these folds together. So see, when I pull my thread taut, you can't see any of the stitches there. If the stitches do come apart, what we want to see is what's called laddering, so that those stitches are parallel to each other as they go up. They're not at an angle. When we look at the running stitch that we did before, you would see that the thread, if I can get it, the thread is at an angle. I don't know if you can see that or not, but these stitches are at an angle, as opposed to the slip stitch where they're parallel to each other. So when we pull to taut, we don't see any of the stitches at all. Now, what can be a little confusing is on the inside, it does look a little bit like the running stitch on either side. But again, what we're working on, or our goal from this sample, is to get technique. What I found is our dexterity has gotten a little worse. I think if I could teach you to do this with your thumbs, just like you text, you would be really good. But this we have to practice. So we're going to go all the way down, and again you can use one of the different kinds of knots. By this time maybe you're figuring out a knot that you like more than another. And as I'm getting to my pin, I'm going to actually release my pin, wherever it is, because it was kind of getting in the way of my stitches. Again, you just want to slide right down the fold and pull out. Go across from where you came out, right in the fold and down. You want to stay, now see that stitch got really huge, so I'm going to pull it back. You want to stay right on that fold, so that's what you're pulling to the other edge. If you got a pack of needles that has a variety of sizes in it, I would use a smaller needle. I know sometimes it seems like the bigger needle is going to be easier to stitch with, but a lot of times it's harder to get these small stitches with a bigger needle. So in the end, it should look like these two pieces are just laying together. We don't see any stitches on the right side. Then I would stitch to the inside and complete one of the knots that we talked about before. This is the back stitch method. And again, we want to clip off with 1/4 of an inch tail. So your seam would be held together like that. To finish your sample, you will stitch all the way down. And the last of this hand stitching sample is the catch stitch. The catch stitch is a very handy stitch, and we will be using it for on our pajamas to hold down our facing, and some of you might end up using it for your skirt hem. The difference between the catch stitch and every other stitch is that you're trying to make an X. In order to make the X, your needle is going to point in the opposite direction that you're actually going to progress with your stitches. That way, as you take your stitch, it makes an X. So I'm going to use a waist knot again. I'm going to stitch on the hem in between the layers and come up where I want my stitches to start. Then I'm going to take a little foundation stitch there so that my thread is secure. Again, not tight, just taut. Okay, so the point of my needle is pointing to the left. I'm going to take my stitch on the right side and then come out on the left. So this is again like a hem. So I've pressed up 1 inch on my sample. This is the front of my garment, this is the bottom of my garment. I'm going to then, on the right side of my garment, I'm going to come a good 1/4 of an inch, maybe closer to a 1/2 inch than a 1/4 of an inch, but not too big again. And on the right side, once again, I just want to take 1 or 2 threads. Take my stitch in on the right and out on the left. Whoop. And do you see how when I pulled that too tight it started to curl up? So we want to make sure everything lays flat. Then I'm going to come down about this same distance and stitch on the hem side. Now remember, this is just through the hem, so I can take a bigger stitch back to one of our 1/8 of an inch stitches. And proceed again to the right side, just right above where the hem depth is ending. And I'm just taking 1 or 2 threads. And progressing forward, just through the hem, taking my 1/8 of an inch. Ooh, it kind of got deep there. Let's move back. And forward again. So anything that is on the right side of your garment, you just want to be picking 1 or 2 threads in the fabric. That way it will be less obvious on the right side. But on these stitches that are on the hem side, we can take a little bigger stitch. We want our stitches to be even, an even width and even distance from the edge. Because in this case, what we're doing is to hold this hem in place, our stitches on the right side of the garment are just above the hem depth. This catch stitch is handy because it has a little bit of give in it. The fabric can move slightly independently of each other, and that way in a skirt, if it needs to flow a little bit more, it can with this stitch. Also, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to use it on our pajama top when we're holding down the facing. The facing and the neckline might need to, again, move independently of each other. So if we use the catch stitch, they have the freedom to do that. So at this point, I think you can really get the idea of the X's. So your catch stitch should make X's. Let's see. I will just do a tailor's knot, so a big circle, put my needle through it, and pull it down flat. And then I will trim this off to 1/4 inch, and I will clip off my waist knot. So the back of your sample will look like this all the way across. The front of your sample then again should be pressed flat. Because we've just picked up 1 or 2 threads, the stitches on the front side, even though it's a contrasting thread, should not be very obvious.